The morning had started like any other in a neighborhood where lawns were trimmed low. Pickup trucks had American flags fluttering in the beds, and small talk was as common as coffee. Old chairs, VHS tapes, and yellowed photo frames lined driveways like artifacts from a time people pretended to remember. And then there was him. Gray beard, flannel shirt, denim jacket with sleeves rolled high. His name was Joe, but most around here just called him that quiet guy with the limp. Nobody knew much. Vietnam maybe, or just bad knees. Hard to say. He didn't talk about the past, and folks didn't ask. Joe sat up late. Not much on his table. A few rusted tools, an old compass, a canteen that looked like it had crossed deserts. But right there, almost as an afterthought, was the coin, about the size of a $50. No color, no markings anyone could understand. Just a symbol, a trident and wings crossed behind a skull. And a date, 1971. A teenager browsing Xbox games walked past, snorted, and said, "What is this, a pirate coin?" Joe didn't flinch. He just looked at the kid, not angry, not amused, and said, "It's real." The kid rolled his eyes and walked off. Nobody noticed that Joe's hand stayed on the coin for a while after that, like it had weight only he could feel. And he wasn't selling it to clean out junk. He was selling it for her. Marge Tennyson had been married to Ray for 41 years. They met on a train, got married fast, wartime fast, and spent the next 4 decades trying to outrun the ghosts he brought home. Ray never talked about the job, only said, "I did what I had to do." He'd get quiet every November. Some years he wouldn't come out of the garage at all, but he loved Marge the best he could. And when cancer came, he faced it the same way he faced everything else, with silence and a clenched jaw. Joe was Ray's best friend. Served beside him in a place so deep in the jungle it didn't even have a name, just coordinates and the kind of heat that steamed through your bones. Ray had saved Joe's life more than once, and on Ray's last day, he gripped Joe's wrist and said, "Take care of her." So when the foreclosure notice showed up on Marge's mailbox, Joe didn't think twice. He gathered what little he had, but the only thing of value, real value, was the coin Ray had given him after a mission that nobody was supposed to survive. It wasn't a medal. You didn't get those for what they did. But the coin? It meant you'd seen the worst and still came home. Joe didn't want to sell it. Not really. But promises made on dying breaths don't get shelved. They get honored, even if it costs you the last piece of who you used to be. Now here's where the twist starts tightening. About halfway through the morning, a guy in his 20s with too much hair gel and not enough respect strolls up to the yard sale. Wireless earbuds, oversized camera, talking into his phone like he's on the set of a reality show. He's a local content creator, whatever that means. He's got a podcast called Small Town Gold, where he pokes fun at local events, thrift shops, and old-timers selling antiques. He sees the coin. Overhears Joe telling another customer it came from Laos in 71, and instantly smells a story, just not the right kind. He mutters into his mic. Guy here claims he's selling a CIA kill coin from the 70s. Either we found Jason Bourne's garage sale, or someone's off their meds. He laughs, uploads the clip, doesn't ask permission, doesn't care. By sundown, the post has a couple thousand views and a comment section full of LOLs and question marks. Joe doesn't even know it happened. But someone else does. It's around 11:20 when the sound of an old diesel engine cuts through the morning breeze. Heads turn as a military green Willys Jeep rumbles around the corner, like something pulled out of a war movie and dropped into suburbia. She steps out before the engine stops. Mid-60s, boots polished, hair tucked under a ball cap. No makeup, no smile, just presence. Like someone who's walked through fire and didn't feel the need to prove it anymore. On her sleeve, a small insignia. Most wouldn't recognize it, but Joe does. The woman walks straight to the table, ignoring the rest of the sale. She doesn't look at the old tools or the compass. Her eyes lock on the coin, and for a second her breath catches. She leans in, picks up the coin with a kind of reverence you reserve for something sacred, and turns it slowly in her hand. Her eyes glisten, not with sentiment, but memory. She looks at Joe and says, quietly but firmly, "You were there too." Joe doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. It's written in his eyes, in the way his shoulders set back and his jaw hardens. Two strangers, one coin, a past that refuses to stay buried. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from awkwardness. It comes from mutual understanding. That's the silence hanging between Joe and this woman now. She introduces herself. Commander Sarah Blake. Retired. She holds out her hand, not like a greeting, but like a challenge. Joe shakes it. She tells him she's the daughter of Colonel David Blake. And that coin was given to the men who went into Operation Dust Echo, a mission so dark it never made the news, and so bloody it never left her family. Her father died in that jungle. The army told her he died in a helicopter crash. But she found records, redacted, scattered, and a name that kept surfacing, Joseph S. Carter. Joe. This Joe. Joe exhales like a dam just cracked. He doesn't offer details, just says, "Your father was the reason I'm still breathing." Her hands tighten on the coin. "Then I owe you more than thanks," she says. "I owe you the truth." She came because she saw the podcast clip. The coin in the photo. She knew what it was the moment it hit her screen. She'd spent years searching for that symbol, for survivors, for answers. And now, standing under a blue tarp in the middle of a Saturday sidewalk sale, she finally has a piece of it. And Joe, he's not sure whether to feel relief or guilt. Because suddenly that coin isn't just a favor to a widow. It's a door back into a night he's spent 50 years trying to forget. Joe didn't talk about the jungle. Not to his neighbors. Not to his family. Not even to himself, most nights. The coin had always stayed buried in the coat pocket of a life he tried to keep moving forward. But now, standing in front of Colonel Blake's daughter, Sarah, he didn't have the luxury of silence anymore. It started slow, like muscle memory easing its way back into his bones. The feel of damp mud in his boots. The taste of metal in the back of his throat when they crept through the trees. The way the air went still, unnaturally still, just before the ambush. Operation Dust Echo, 1971. Classified insertion, Laos border. Clean and fast, they were told. Intel confirms the site is abandoned. But Intel was wrong. They walked into hell that night. Charlie had been there for days, dug in deep, bunkers carved under tree roots like termites. There was no signal, no way out. The only thing between his team and a field of body bags was one man, Colonel Blake. Joe's voice tightened when he spoke the colonel's name. "He didn't tell us to retreat," Joe said. "He told us to run, and then he stayed behind. He held the line while they exfiltrated the wounded, covered them with fire that didn't stop, not even when his radio crackled out. His final transmission was one word, go." The coin was given to every man who made it back. Unofficially, quietly. A symbol not of victory, but of survival. A mark that said you were there. You came out. Now carry it. Joe had carried it ever since. And now, so had Sarah, not in her hand, but in the ache behind her eyes. She'd spent 40 years looking for the truth of how her father died. And here it was, not in a file, not in a medal, but in a man who still wore the guilt like a second skin. Sarah pulled back her jacket sleeve, revealing a thin white line across her forearm, a scar long healed. This wasn't from war, she said. It was from the search. She had enlisted at 18, not to serve, but to investigate, to find the pieces they buried, to pull secrets out of locked drawers and burned reports. Her rank, her clearance, her reputation, all of it had been tools to dig deeper into the hole her father's name had fallen into. And somewhere along the way, it stopped being about truth. It became personal, obsessive. "You think I joined because I believed in the mission?" she asked, half laughing. "No, I joined because I couldn't sleep knowing he died with nobody remembering how." She handed Joe a photo, creased and faded, folded 100 times. It showed a young man, laughing with his sleeves rolled up and a cigarette hanging from his lip. The kind of guy who looked like he could win a war and then fix your transmission. That's him. Before they sent him off to disappear. Joe took the photo with hands that hadn't trembled in years. He didn't speak, but his eyes said everything. He remembered. The thing about grief is it doesn't always come with answers. Sometimes it just sits in the room, like a broken chair you can't bring yourself to throw away. Sarah had grown up with silence. Her mother never remarried. The house was quiet, polished, and frozen in 1971. Colonel Blake's chair was never moved. His boots stayed under the coat rack, his toothbrush still in the holder. People told her to move on. But she couldn't, not until she knew the truth. And now, after years of clawing through government files, chasing old names, and decoding redacted field reports, the answer had arrived at a yard sale in a town too small to have a stoplight. It wasn't just about the coin anymore. It was about a moment. Sarah took a breath and asked the question she'd carried like a stone in her chest for decades. Was he scared? Joe met her eyes. No, he said. Not once. And in that moment, something shifted. Sarah blinked hard, trying to hold herself together. But even the strongest shoulders crack when they finally set the weight down. Joe never hated the enemy. Not really. You expect bullets from the other side. You don't expect betrayal from your own. Dust Echo wasn't supposed to happen. The team was sent in based on bad intel, under orders from someone who cared more about a promotion than a body count. When the shooting started, command pulled the plug. They were left stranded, no evac, no comms, and no official acknowledgement they were even there. The war didn't kill us, Joe said bitterly. Politics did. He'd buried men on that hill. Men who died waiting for help that never came. Men who weren't listed on any wall because their mission never made the reports. They made us ghosts, he said. Living ghosts. Walking reminders of something they'd rather forget. Sarah nodded. My father wasn't the only casualty that day. No, he wasn't. The mission was buried. But now the truth was rising. Not with flags or speeches, but in two people standing side by side, holding the only proof that those lives, those choices ever mattered. Joe wasn't a man who believed in second chances. Not for himself, anyway. But as he looked at Sarah, her strength, her questions, her fire, he realized something. Maybe the point of surviving was to finally tell the story. So they made a decision. They would hold a memorial. Not at a cemetery. Not in a church. But right there, in the very spot where the world had tried to laugh away the past. No flyers. No press. Just a table, a photo, a coin, and truth. Sarah stood behind the coin and told the story of her father's final act. Joe told the story of the men who didn't make it. They spoke not as soldiers, but as survivors. And slowly, people began to listen. The barista, who once rolled her eyes at Joe's flannel, brought him coffee. A neighbor who hadn't spoken to Joe in 10 years stood with tears in her eyes. Even the young podcaster showed up again.